Well, hello, my beautiful reader friends, and welcome back, or welcome for the first time. If you are new here, my name is Lori Beth, and welcome to my little corner of the internet where we get into all of the bookish small talk. So I'm really excited to do today's video because I've wanted to do one of these for so long, and that is a tier ranking video. Now, I have previously tried to do this as I was coming out of my Spanish influenza or whatever it was that I was plagued with over the holiday season, and I just was not functioning correctly. My neurons weren't firing. I lost half of the footage that I recorded. It was basically just a wash. So here we are, a couple of weeks healed, attempting to do this again, but I decided instead of going over every book that I read in 2024, because if I'm being honest, it's really hard for me to not talk in so much detail while doing these. I am going to do all of the fantasy books that I read in 2024 because they did make up a majority of what I read last year. And I thought to do this because as I was doing some of my last videos, I kept thinking to myself like, oh, I didn't read that much fantasy last year. Just kidding. I read mostly fantasy. I don't know how that happens to me. I don't know where my mind goes sometimes. So with that being said, we are going to go over, I believe it was 34 books in total that fell into the fantasy genre from last year. And so because we have so many books to go over, I am going to try to keep this short and sweet, meaning I'm not going to go into too much detail about every book because I have talked about most of these throughout the year of 2024, whether I was doing wrap-up videos or TBR videos, what have you. I even have some vlogs on some of these. I'll link what I can below, but also just go back or, hit that subscribe button and go through the library and spend a little more time with me if you so choose. But because I can yap so much, I am really just going to try to keep things moving, grab a book, brief thoughts and feelings on that book, and put it in its category. Speaking of categories, let's go over what I have on my tier list for today. So first, and at the very top of the list, is Bury Me With It. I don't think that needs a lot of description, but it is a book that when I leave this earth needs to stay with me. Like, you need to put that in the ground with me. It is a 6 out of 5 star read. Below that is Understood the Assignment. This to me is still a really good book, like a book that I really enjoyed, but didn't quite hit that 5-star mark for me. But I feel like the author really knew what they were doing. Like, they understood the assignment. They gave me things that I wanted in that book. Next category below that, so our mid tier, is You're Doing Great, Sweetie. You're Doing Great. These are books that are not necessarily my favorites. They didn't really stand out too much. They weren't bad. They're just mid. These are mid-level books, and these are books that I would still recommend to people. They were just doing great, they were really doing great for trying. Category below that one is Never Heard of Her. These are books that I don't even remember reading. So books that I know I read because they were on my list from books read last year, but I don't really even remember what they are about. I have truly lost the plot on them. They are gone from me. Never heard of her. And our last category in the bottom category is I Will Never Get This Time Back. And this is a callback to a previous video I did where I talked about books that I will never get this time back from, meaning this is a book I probably should have DNF'd. I will never get the time back that I spent reading it. Kind of wish I could. If I could change it out with another book, I would totally go back in time and do that so that my time would be better spent. So those are the 5 categories that we have today to place the 34 fantasy books that I read last year into. And because we do have so many to go over, we are going to go ahead and jump right in. I'm pretty sure that when I uploaded these books, they uploaded in alphabetical order, which was not how I meant for them to be in here. I actually kind of wanted these to be from first read to most recently read. So early in 2024 to the end of 2024, it did not happen that way. That's fine. We're just going to grab at random so that we can get started. I'm going to start with an easy one because I think you guys know me by now, and that is going to be The House of Flame and Shadow, Sarah J. Maas, Bury Me With It. I love this series so much. I loved this book so much. I know it got so much hate online, but I loved delving into more characters in this series because I think that's where the series is going to end up taking us. And I just absolutely adored it. I just love the Crescent City series so dang much. All right. The Invocations by Crystal Sutherland. Ooh. Where should I put? I'm going to put this in understood the assignment. I did rate this one very, very high, but is this one that should be in the grave with me when I go? Probably not, but it was so good. And if you have not read Crystal Sutherland's books before, highly recommend. That woman can bring the gothic vibes in her story and also just write some very in-depth characters for honestly not very long books. Very, very highly recommend. A Fragile Enchantment. Ooh, this one is going to definitely go, I will never get this time back. I talked about this in as one of my most disappointing books from last year. On paper, this book was like right up my alley. Even though it was young adult, I liked the premise of this story, but it just did not land. I did not feel connected to any character in this book. I thought it was more juvenile, like more middle grade than young adult. Very disappointing. That one was kind of a bummer. Let's go on here. So Crimson Moth or the Heartless Hunter, depending on where you live on this globe. I'm going to put this in You're Doing Great, Sweetie. So I did really enjoy this one. I just felt like it was lacking just a tiny bit. Like it needed a little more depth for me to feel more invested. However, I did enjoy it. And this is a series. I think the second book comes out this year. So I'm going to continue on with this series. Because again, I really liked the premise of the book. I like witches. I love reading about witch stories, especially this one because it was like a romantasy with like a witch hunter trope. And that was really fun to read. Interview with the Vampire. Ooh. Don't hate me on this, but I'm going to put this one in You're Doing Great, Sweetie. So I have wanted to read this book for so long, and I don't know if me hyping myself up for this was the issue, but I had like really big plans for this book because it's been on my list for so long and I've known the story for so long. And I honestly just thought that it was very, very dense, very bulky and kind of boring through like the middle of the book. It was kind of like bookended with like exciting things in the beginning and at the end. And it just didn't land as much as I wanted it to. So that was a little bit disappointing, but you know, that's okay. You win some, you lose some. Daughter of the Moon Goddess. This is gonna go in Bury Me With It. I don't know if this is gonna be surprising or not, but I have gone on and on about this book. And if you have not read this story or from this author before, you are truly missing out on a beautiful, whimsical, just fantastical fantasy world with such a brilliantly written female main character. I love the story, especially if you love any type of mythology. This is really heavily based on Chinese mythology, and it kind of changed my life last year, which sounds very dramatic, but that's why it's going and Bury Me With It. So I'm going to also grab Heart of the Sun Warrior, which is the second book to that. This one is actually going to go and Understood the Assignment. So it was up there. Like this was a great sequel to this book. I felt like it had its faults, but overall, I really, really liked it. I didn't love it quite as much as the first one, but I did like that this was a duology, which you guys know I love a duology. Overall, I just wasn't quite in love with it as much as the first book, but I was very pleased with the way that it ended and the way that it wrapped up. So again, highly recommend that, especially if you like a duology. You don't want to get invested in like a super long series. Sometimes duologies are nice for that, where some, one standalone book is not always enough, but getting into like a 16 book universe is overwhelming. So I think a duology is kind of like a good happy medium. All right, Evocation. All right, I'm going to put this in You're Doing Great, Sweetie. I was going to be more harsh on this for a second there, but I don't think it's quite as dramatic as I Will Never Get This Time Back because it wasn't that bad as far as like, I really liked the plot of this story, the actual storyline of this group of people that all worked in the occult, and they all have different ways that they are involved in the occult, and they're using their powers together to try to solve this curse that is occurring to one of the main characters. However, I just felt like the book kind of lost me when it got too heavily invested in the relationships of the characters and kind of lost the plot. It felt like it got very much pushed in the back. And I think if it was like flip-flopped, where it was like the plot, the main premise of the story was in the foreground and just a little bit into the relationship on the back, I think it would have been perfect. But unfortunately, it was not. It was flip-flopped, and it kind of just really brought the book down for me. All right, The Branded by Joe Riccioni. Up here. Never heard of her. So I received this book in the mail as a PR package. I'm on a few lists for different publishers to get ARCs, and this just showed up in the mail one day. Didn't know anything about it, read the premise of it, and I was like, oh, this sounds right up my alley. It's a fantasy book. It, follows a main character that discovers she has powers. There's a sister relationship involved. I don't even remember what this book is about. I can't even tell you what the characters did in this book. I don't know why it felt so boring to me. It did not grab my attention at all. I can't even tell you more than basically what I've just said. So we're going to move on from that. All right. An Academy for Liars, Alexis Henderson. Oh, man. Where do I want to put this one? You're doing great, sweetie. So I did enjoy this. I liked, obviously, that it was a dark academia book, but I felt like it was almost too all over the place. So I think the cool thing about dark academia is you can kind of delve into like incorporating fantasy on top of it, which just, in my opinion, accelerates the dark academia vibes or like atmosphere to the book. This almost felt like it didn't all connect for some reason, between the fantasy and like the magic system, the school environment, and then the romance that was involved. It all kind of like felt like separate pieces to me, and that they didn't really like go together or like blend well as I would like in a book. So I really liked it. I thought it was a good idea. It just didn't deliver in a very fluid way for me. All right, Babel. Going right to the top, baby. Bury me with it. I love this book. This was a reread for me last year. That's how much I loved it. And I kind of brought the year to an end with this story. And oh, was it just amazing. Now, if you've not read this book before, it is a little bit different as far as fantasy and dark academia goes. It is a very dense book. It is paced in a way that makes you really appreciate the characters in the story, their struggles that they are all personally dealing with, because this, even though it is a fantasy / dark academia, does delve into some pretty heavy topics, especially about the characters in the time frame that they are in this story. But in my opinion, it kind of gives you the density that is sometimes needed in a book to feel invested in a character. So I've talked about that before too, how sometimes I'm like, oh, this book was too dense, like meaning it was too much, like too fluffy. It needed to be edited more. And sometimes a book has density for a reason. It is slowing things down. It is making you understand someone or something. And that's what Babel was really like for me. And I think the reread for it made it like the bury me with it level. So I'm really glad that I spent the time to do that this year. A Tempest of Tea. I talked about this in my most disappointing books. I will never get this time back. I just did not like this book. I did not like it. And I was so bummed because on paper, this has every element that I usually eat up. I was very disappointed that I didn't like really the book at all. And I think mostly I didn't connect with the characters, which is a really big deal for me. So that one was kind of a letdown, if I'm being honest. The Atlas 6, I'm going to put this in, understood the assignment. Really loved the Atlas 6. Loved Olivia Blake's writing. loved the atmosphere, the setting, the magic system in this story. Thought it was incredible. Maybe not necessarily 5-star, like bury me with it level, but really, really liked it, especially as far as that blend of dark academia and fantasy goes. The Atlas Paradox, I will never get this time back. And I actually love watching this on screen, like seeing the juxtaposition between these two on, like visually on a screen, because the second book to this just really wasted my time. I thought it was such a filler book. At least that's what it was feeling like to me. I felt like in the beginning of the book, you knew like what the main goal of the characters were. Like you knew what the plot was going to be, like what they were trying to get to. But then also simultaneously, nothing was happening the entire time to get them there until very end of the book. And it was like, boom, boom, boom. Finally, they were doing the thing that they were supposed to do. So it felt like a placeholder to me, like that middle book in between the first one that was like really exciting and good, and the last one that could be potentially another favorite Olivia Blake of mine. But it turned me off so much that I have zero interest in finishing the series, and I have not continued the series since then. I don't think I ever will. I don't know. Never say never. I say that stuff all the time, but you really do never know. All right, Serpent and the Wings of Night. Where are we going to put this? You know what? I'm going to do it. I'm going to put this in Bury Me With It, because I did not know that there was going to be another series out there and like another author out there that was going to evoke the emotion from me like Sarah J. Maas has. Not only did it have like the human versus vampires trope in here, it also had like a tournament that was involved, but not in a copy paste way of the Hunger Games. It felt much more intense to me than that. And also the romance, it was so good. There was like surprising things, like plot twists that happened in the story that I really did not even see coming. But more than that, I just fell in love with the characters, and I've not had like that heartstring, like tug on my heartstrings feeling since reading probably ACOTAR. And that's what this book was like for me. And I highly recommend, if you are maybe coming off of like a Sarah J. Maas hangover, like if you've read ACOTAR, I think you would really, really like the Serpent and the Wings of Night series. With that being said, The Ashes and the Star-Cursed King, I'm going to throw this right up in Understood the Assignment. Didn't love it as much as the first book, but I still really, really liked it. I loved the character development in the second book and where the story ended up leading us to. I have the third book, or like the next book in the series, waiting upstairs for me to read it, and I am so excited. I can't wait to get to that one again. All right. A Sorceress Comes to Call. T. Kingfisher. You're doing great, sweetie. This is a little upsetting because I am a T. Kingfisher stan. Like, I love their writing so much. I love their style. They're quirky. They can write this dialogue that makes you laugh, like laugh out loud, which I don't find myself doing often when I'm reading. And I've always really appreciated that about their writing and their stories. This was actually a longer book of what they've previously written in the past. And I don't know if that's what it was or if it was the retelling of the story. It was a retelling of The Goose Girl, which I don't even honestly really know what that is. I just didn't care for it. I just thought it was not my jam. I don't know. It wasn't bad. I didn't really like the story. That's kind of, there's no other way to say it other than that. All right. Let's do The Warm Hands of Ghosts. I'm going to throw this in Understood the Assignment. I've never read a Catherine Arden before, but I really, really enjoyed this story, more specifically because it was like a historical fantasy, and I don't always love historical. It kind of depends like what part of history we're talking about. So because of the time frame that this was set in, so directly after the war, and we're following a nurse trying to figure out what happened to her brother, it was a very tumultuous time already. It's not my favorite time period to read about, but the fantasy elements that the author was able to weave into the story kept me invested the whole time. And I came out the other side like, wow, that was the first book about this time frame, or like about a nurse post-war or kind of like mid-war, that I've ever really liked. That's not my jam. I don't really love reading books like that. So I really, really ended up liking that one. The God and the Gummy Hoe. This was an interesting one. Where do I want to put you? How about Understood the Assignment? And here's why. Because this is another one, just like The Warm Hands of Ghosts, that kind of took me by surprise because of the setting of this one. It gave those like cozy fantasy vibes where it was set in a coffee shop and following characters that either worked there or were kind of like always at this coffee shop. And I don't love a cozy fantasy. It's just not my thing. This one was the complete opposite because it had characters that were also trying to solve crime. And that took what I didn't like about cozy fantasies, which is the no stakes or very low stakes, and bam, like threw a bunch of stakes in on top of the coffee shop atmosphere. And I actually really, really enjoyed this book. I thought it was really fun. And I believe this is a series too, so I will probably continue on with that one as well. All right, I don't know. Okay. Watermoon. Never heard of her. This is really funny. I have a vlog on this, and part of me wants to go back and rewatch the vlog to get my opinions on this book as I was reading it. I got this as an ARC from NetGalley last year, and I was so excited because I loved the premise of it. It was giving me not just that fantasy vibe again, but kind of that mythology vibe as well. And I don't know, I just didn't sink into me. Like, I don't remember much about this book. I slightly remember what the premise is, but also I don't even really think that I could tell you that much about it now. So this is going to Never Heard of Her because I don't really remember anything about it. So there you go. Okay, let's go on. Let's see. We've got some series here, so let's maybe tackle the series. I did really good this last year on trying to continue on with a series that I started and get through them within like a few months of each other, because I have in the past really stretched out reading book series before, and it has kind of done me dirty because I don't remember everything that I've read. So I really tried to make a conscious effort last year to work through some of the book series that I was attempting to start. One of those series was the Darker Shade of Magic series that I have gone on about 1,000 times before. So I'm not going to say much because I also have an entire vlog series on this. I'm just going to go ahead and move these to where they belong. Bury me with them. Bury me with them. Kel and Lila forever. I don't know if I have loved a couple in a book, like a fantasy couple, truly like deeply down as much as I loved the two of them. And I don't know, I still think about this series quite often. And I am also a huge V.E. Schwab stan. I've read multiple books from her. I really just love everything she writes, but this series has a piece of me, and it is coming with me when I leave this earth. So that's for damn sure. All right, let's see. Ooh, Assassin's Apprentice. You're doing great, sweetie. I've talked about this a couple of times too, and how this ended up being kind of a disappointing book for me, which I was so bummed about because I was so excited to get into this world and just really get invested in a longer series again, taking my time kind of like once a month, maybe reading a book from a series until I could chip through the entirety of it. And I just didn't love it as much as I wanted to. I didn't hate it. I did not hate it. This was another book that felt very dense to me, and dense in not necessarily the best way. And it felt like nothing really happened for the majority of it until I swear like the last 50 pages or so. I felt like things really picked up. And I also don't know if that's because of the time period it was written in, because if that's just how Robin Hobb writes, her pacing could just be a much slower pace than what I'm used to reading. Or it could be just this storyline in the universe of these books. Hard to say. I'll probably continue on. I think I want to read the second book to this just to see if I'm still feeling the same way. But anyways, I didn't love it, didn't hate it. I thought this was going to be a truly like earth-shaking experience, and it really just did not do that for me. So that was kind of a bummer. All right. Bride by Allie Hazelwood. This is going to go up in Understood the Assignment. Mostly because I just love Allie Hazelwood. And I'm not kidding, I have not read an Allie Hazelwood that I didn't like. I am kind of falling behind on her books, so I need to consciously read through a few more of them this year. But I have honestly just never disliked an Allie Hazelwood book. This was not my favorite book by her, but I was really excited to see her kind of delve into the paranormal fantasy romance side of things, because I think it just gave me everything I've really liked in one book. I don't know. That's a very simplified way to explain it, but I love her romance books. I love the way she writes dialogue, like the banter in her characters. And also, I just love fantasy, clearly, as we're doing this tier ranking video. But I thought it was just really fun. Really enjoyed the blend of her romance writing with a fantasy trope on top of it. The Sirens by Amelia Hart. So this was another arc that I got. And where do I want to put this one? Let's go You're Doing Great, Sweetie. I really like Amelia Hart as an author. I think she's really good at writing family dynamics. That seems to be at least what I've read from her so far. It's always kind of like a family dynamic story. I think this one didn't hit quite as hard as some of her previous books for me because I felt a little disconnected from the characters. Like there was this big secret going on with them that you kind of knew, but kind of didn't know. And I think it was almost like too vague at some points in time that it made me not feel as invested as I wanted to. I still thought it was a really good book, a really good story. Again, she's got a very romantic writing style, especially when it comes to talking about families and family dynamics and stuff like that, which I kind of like to read about. And I think she's a great writer. This one was just not like my favorite that I have read from her. All right, Kingdom of Ash, let's just do it. Why are we wasting our time? Throw it up at the top. I've talked about this book endlessly. I want it with me when I am buried in the ground, and probably the entire Kingdom of Ash series. But if all of these are too hard to fit when I go, just at least Kingdom of Ash. You heard it here first. All right. Lady Macbeth by Ava Reed. Ooh, I'm going right up here. Understood the Assignment. I don't know if Ava Reed can do me wrong at this point in time. I love her writing so much. It is so atmospheric, and this one was particularly dark, and I really loved the vibe. It felt a little bit poetic and kind of macabre, and also full of like female rage, which is a trope I will read about every time. I love a female character all fired up and basically wanting to do what it is she needs to do. And this is I don't know if it's technically a retelling because I don't know if I've ever read about Lady Macbeth, but it is Lady Macbeth who is married to Macbeth. So this book was just vibes. The vibes were immaculate as far as dark, moody, poetic, romantic. Oh, I loved it. It was like there was just a touch of everything in this book. Love it so much. Love her as an author, if I'm being honest. Let's go into the last series that we have on the list because we might as well just like knock it out right now. And you might be surprised by this, but I don't know if they're all going to end up in the same tier. A Discovery of Witches, Bury Me With It. Bury Me With It. Again, I didn't know that there was another series out there that I could love as dearly as some of my like tried and true OG series, but this one is just so beautiful. This feels like such a wonderful adult level fantasy book, and it has everything that I love: an academic setting, witches, vampires, other creatures are also involved in this world as well. And then on top of that, a historical element that I enjoy reading about. So it is a fun series. If you like particularly adult fantasy, this is a great series to get into. I describe it often as Outlander and Twilight having a cute, perfect little baby. That's what the Discovery of Witches series is like for me. So as far as the next books in the series, so A Shadow of Night, the second book, I'm going to put in Understood the Assignment. I actually really, really liked this one because of what the characters were doing in this story specifically. I liked reading, like where they were at, what they were doing. The atmosphere of it was just really, really fun to be in. And I'm also going to take the Book of Life. Where should I put? Ooh, no, I'm just going to put it in Understood the Assignment. Did I love 2 and 3 as much as the first one? Not necessarily. I think the first one just really did it for me, really pulled me into something that I really loved. However, the last book was phenomenal. I was fully invested the entire time. I couldn't wait to see what was going to happen to these characters that I had grown to love, like a very invested feeling in these characters and everybody involved in this story, which for me is getting harder and harder to find. So I really appreciate that about this series. If you like an Outlander vibe with like an even heavier fantasy element, this is right up your alley. So this one is a little different. Technically fantasy, technically manga, but I included it in here because this is the very first manga I've ever read, and I really, really enjoyed it. And that is The Girl from the Other Side. And I'm just going to go ahead and put this up in Understood the Assignment. Now, I don't have a lot of experience with manga, but from the premise of this one, I was so intrigued because it sounded like the most wholesome story. It follows a monster and a little girl who falls from like her side of the world into the other side where he lives, and he like follows her and protects her, and is just so sweet and so charming, and it really delivered. And that's what I love, man. When you read the synopsis of something and you're like, is it going to land? And then it does. And that's what this did for me. And I'm really excited to continue on with this series, and honestly kind of dip my toe into more manga as the year goes on. So if you have any suggestions, drop those below, because I am a total noob when it comes to that genre. All right, couple more books to go over here. Let's hit A Sea of Unspoken Things by Adrienne Young. Ooh. Understood the Assignment. Understood the Assignment. Should I put that down here? Let me get better at arranging these. I just love Adrienne Young. Oh man, she is just such a solid writer. And this was a very cool story because it blended atmosphere, family drama, family dynamics, a little touch of maybe romance, and kind of almost felt like a magical realism vibe. I don't know if you want to call it like super heavy fantasy, but there was definitely some kind of magical, mystical things happening in this book. And on top of the atmosphere, it was just phenomenal. And man, this woman can write. She is a very solid writer. Highly recommend if you have not looked at any of her books before. And let's hit Wisteria by Adeline Grace. This might seem crazy. I'm going to throw it up here. Bury me with it. I love this series so much. And not only did I love this series, I loved this book. So this is the third book in the Belladonna series. Again, I don't know if that's what the series is actually called. Belladonna is the first book. But this is the last and final book in the series, and it kind of went into a different direction with a different character. I didn't know if I was going to enjoy that. I loved it so much. I think I actually liked it better than the original no, I'm not going to say that. Equally. I liked them equally as much, but it did not disappoint. In fact, it was a beautiful ending to a series that I kind of want more from. Like, I am almost sad that she ended it at 3. This is one of those series I feel like I could continue reading and it wouldn't feel that overwhelming for being a large series. So really loved it. Actually kind of bummed that one's over. But also another good series to recommend if you like kind of like a gothic Bridgerton vibe. That's what those books are like to me. And last and final on our list is The Familiar by Leigh Bardugo. I'm putting this in Understood the Assignment. This is not my favorite Leigh Bardugo book, but what she was able to do was have me read another historical fantasy and enjoy it. from the synopsis of this one, like when this was set, this is like Spanish Inquisition time. I wouldn't usually pick that time frame to read when it comes from like the historical standpoint of things. That wouldn't necessarily be my first choice of time periods to read about. But the way that she writes and the subject matter that she covered in this book blended with fantasy was just so beautiful. So beautiful. Classic, dark, gripping Leigh Bardugo writing. Her stuff is a little bit raw, a little gritty. I always kind of describe her in that way, like where her characters are a little bit like rough around the edges, in a way that is just so endearing. And she really delivered in this book, especially going into that historical direction. So I was very happily surprised that I loved it as much as I did. I mean, maybe not, because you know my tried and true love for that woman. Definitely number one stan right here. Self-proclaimed. But man, I love a Leigh Bardugo book. Oof. Well, there you have it, my friends. Those are all of the fantasy books I read in 2024. And honestly, this was super fun to do. I really enjoyed doing it this tier ranking format, and I'm kind of looking forward to doing some more. If this is something that you enjoyed, let me know in a comment down below, or if there's a certain tier ranking video you would like to see, drop that down below as well. And of course, I would love to know if you have read any of the books that we talked about in today's video. Let me know your thoughts and feelings on those books down below. And per usual, if you liked this video, go ahead and hit that thumbs up button because it always helps a girl out. And if you want to make sure you don't miss any of my other upcoming videos, go ahead and hit that subscribe button too. As always, it has been an absolute blast, and I can't wait to see you guys in the next one.